So wrapping up in Unit 3, I want to come back to those questions we had talked about early on in the unit about, how do we define markets? How do businesses make decisions within those markets? We also asked, what does it look like when a market does its job? What happens when a market doesn't do its job? And then how does the government intervene whenever the market doesn't do its job? And we're really going to focus on these last three questions today. What does it look like when a market's doing what it's supposed to? What about when it's not doing what it's supposed to? And then finally, how does the government intervene? So, whenever we think about supply and demand and we think about being fully efficient, we should think about this point right here, equilibrium. Because we said equilibrium is the market telling us what is the most efficient point, right? We've talked about this before that markets allocate resources in the best way possible, in the way that best satisfies the wants and needs of consumers. So, whenever we're being fully efficient, we're allocating our resources as best as we can, and we're maximizing something that we call consumer surplus and producer surplus. And really, all that is, it's just that surplus is just the additional benefit you get from participating in the market. So, consumer surplus would actually be this area, that triangle that's above the selling price but below the demand curve. Think about it this way. You see a shirt at the store and you see that shirt and you're like, hey man, I'm willing to pay $30 for that shirt. That is an awesome looking shirt. I'd pay $30 for it. But guess what? It's only $20. That extra $10 that you were willing to spend, but you didn't have to, that's consumer surplus. It's like free money. Like it's money you would have been willing to spend, but you didn't have to. And so the sum of all of those different ones within that market, all the different what I would have been willing to spend versus what I actually had to spend, that's known as consumer surplus. The same thing's true for producers. Producers have a surplus. It's kind of easier to think about theirs. Theirs is really just their profit. Because their profit represents the difference between the lowest price they'd be willing to sell it at, which typically is like it's their cost, their marginal cost. It's the additional cost to make the product because they want to at least cover their costs, right? So that's their lowest price they're willing to go, but they oftentimes sell it for more than that. And so that extra profit they make between their cost versus what they actually sell for, that's their surplus. And whenever we maximize that surplus, we say that's the correct amount of a good being produced because we're maximizing that extra benefit that goes to either to consumers or producers. Now, that's at full efficiency whenever we're producing the exact right amount of the product, but sometimes we see that markets either overproduce a product or they underproduce a product. And what that means is we're not allocating resources as best as we should. Think about an example when we're somewhere up here, when we've made way too much of a product and so we see that the price is a lot higher. We actually see we have a really small size consumer surplus. Consumers aren't getting a whole ton of extra benefit. Why? Well, because they're paying such a high price. Producers get a lot of extra profit because they're charging such a high price. But if you notice, we don't fill in all those triangles all the way up to our equilibrium. Now, I'm not going to ask you to ever redraw this. I just want to show you guys what this is saying, what this is representing. We're saying that that white triangle that's right there, that triangle is an inefficiency. It's actually something called dead weight loss. So that triangle, it's now yellow, dead weight loss. Dead weight loss is kind of like the benefit that could have been, but we didn't get to get it. We didn't get to have it. And these situations, wherever we see that a market is either overproducing or underproducing a good, we call it market failure. Now, I know typically we think failure is something where it's like a complete and utter, like, you think like an F at school. Don't think of it that way. In this case, think about market failure as anything that's not a 100%, right? Like in school, like an A plus 100%, anything that's not that is considered to be market failure. It's outside of what our optimal is. And so what causes market failure to occur? Well, the three things we're going to be talking about today is we're going to talk about the amount of control within the market, when we see there's too few public goods, and when we're dealing with something known as externalities.